You've landed on The Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us every other week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, still doing it solo here, getting used to it. But today, instead of having a guest where we look at an issue or a movie or a book or what have you, I've got on our new editor here at The Substance, Dave Hallahan. Dave is the host of the Gospel According to podcast. I mentioned that back when I was on early in, I think, their first season of episodes. We talked about Batman over on his show. He had me on for that. That was a lot of fun. So Dave and I have been connected for quite a while. And when it was clear that Trevor and Vincent were stepping back, and I was trying to figure out, Dave reached out to me and said, "Hey man, really appreciate what you guys are doing on The Substance. Let's talk. I'd love to be of whatever help I can." So we talked. He's now the editor of the show. So Dave is a huge reason why The Substance is going to continue to come out. I can get really great guests on. I can prepare really well. I can record a good show. But if we don't have somebody edit it, put it together, and produce it so that we can publish something, The Substance doesn't happen. So very excited to have Dave on the team. And we thought it might be a good idea, kind of as we are in transition, starting the 3.0 era of The Substance, whatever that may turn into, to just kind of have a little bit of a check-in. He asks me some questions about the philosophy of the show, the goal of the show, looking back, looking forward, and he surprised me with a shout-out segment at the end. So we're back on with Substance Shoutouts. So hope you guys enjoy. Be sure to follow Dave. Check him out at The Gospel According to. And here is editor Dave Hallahan and myself.
All right. What's up, Phil?
Hey, man.
I'm on the other side of the computer or the microphone this time. It's exciting.
Yeah, this is fun. And I guess welcome to your official debut. I know you've been on the tail end of the last couple episodes. And again, dude, thank you so much. And for me, for the listeners, everybody who cares, but really from me, you are helping The Substance continue to exist without having to take a indefinite to forever hiatus. So greatly appreciate you, man.
Yeah. I'm happy to do it. It's funny. You know this story, but I kind of discovered or landed upon The Substance back when you guys had Alan Noble on, and I'm a fan of his, and you guys were doing a book giveaway, and I was like, I like free books, and I won, and I kind of felt like, okay, I should probably listen to this podcast since they're sending me a free book. And so since then I've kind of been listening. I love what you guys are doing.
That was a great episode.
That was a great episode. Alan Noble really is a great guest too. Like
he contains multitudes. I'm glad that he finally found his old hip hop recordings and put them up for everybody.
Wait, they're out there?
He did. I think, it couldn't have been Instagram because it's hard to link stuff. It's probably on his Twitter. Yeah.
Twitter. I'll have to go back and look because I remember you guys talking about that, and I've wanted to hear Alan Noble, the rapper, but
it's interesting. It's interesting. Definitely substantive content.
But yeah, so when I saw that Trevor and Vince were leaving, I was like, oh man, like I like The Substance, and I also like podcasts in general and editing. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to figure out how we could make this work.
Hey man, as soon as the big sponsorship dollars come in, man, we'll get you taken care of too.
Yes. You got to get in on the ground floor. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, no, man, I appreciate it. Like, so as you may know, did you ever listen to any of our first 12 episodes? Our very short run initial,
did not, no.
And our special. Do you know that story?
Like how you guys got started? Or?
No, the first 12 episodes, and then we took a 1.5-year break before we relaunched. Do you know that story?
No, I don't.
Oh boy. Okay. So briefly, I think we talked about it once before, but yeah, we mentioned it on our special announcement that was supposed to air, that aired on the week that was supposed to be episode 13. So we ran for 3 months, and then had to take a 1.5 year break. We were in a very fundamentalist church that heard we were talking about social things and are like, you guys need to shut that down. And we tried, just out of respect, we're like, let's put a pause on it, try to have some conversations. And that's not why we ended up leaving the church. We were at that church for another 1.5 years before we ended up leaving. That was in 2020 with some of the COVID and all the racial reconciliation issues being not addressed or addressed poorly, and just a number of things where it's like, honestly, like, God bless all the good efforts done by extremely conservative churches, but it was just clear that was not an environment to where we could thrive in the long term. And then Trevor and I both left that church and we kicked the show back off.
Yeah. So you guys were clearly involved in that church. Were you in like any official capacity with that church?
Yeah, so Trevor and I were both seminary students there. Trevor graduated. Okay. I withdrew before I finished the program. But yeah, I mean, we both taught Sunday schools, led small groups. I preached once or twice from the pulpit. Trevor preached several times. Like, that's pretty involved.
That is an interesting line to walk. I know, being a pastor myself and having a podcast that talks about various different things and like wanting to just explore things. And like, my first podcast was called Thinking Out Loud. And that's what I did. I had, guests on, and we just I wanted to think and talk about whatever and not feel like the pressure to land anywhere necessarily.
Yeah.
And, but doing that in
that conversation, it's not. And I think some of the people from that church, and I don't know if any are curiously listening or hate listening, but it wasn't like, let's throw everything out. But it's like, coming from the Reformed tradition, it's like, we always need to be refining. I always need to be thinking. So we were just pushing, let's dig in and seriously reconsider all these topics in light of scripture and history and divine and human truth. Let's just look at these things to try to figure out what is true and what is right and what is the real way of Jesus in all these things. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And those questions, because I do think, you can ask questions with the intent of merely deconstructing, like just kind of wrecking people's priors without any desire to rebuild after or land anywhere. And that, I don't know how helpful that is, but you can
honestly, a lot of those people who like, and not to paint with a broad brush, I don't harbor any ill will to people who are just like, I'm out because like, we're all in process, right?
Yes.
Like, everybody's story while they are breathing is unfinished. So, I mean, you look at church history, you look at scripture, like rewind before the road to Damascus, Saul's story, not in a good place. Like, you never know where people are going to be. So people who see terrible things done in Jesus's name and are like, I need a break, I'm out. Like,
no, get that.
I got no judgment for that.
Yeah. I do think, I guess what I was getting at is, I think today there is like, among some people, like being contrarian and asking the contrary questions passes as wisdom. Like, if I'm just always like, that can pass as wisdom. But I think there is actual health to asking questions and then going where those answers lead. And like you said, sometimes those questions, and I think sometimes to get in a healthy place with Jesus, you have to leave your local church or, kind of distance yourself from those you've been with before so that you can do an honest reevaluation. But leading those types of conversations for a public audience while working for a church or being involved at a church is tricky, because
the other part of that was too, is we were not, at the time that we had the show, we were not like employees or like we were not like publicly, like outwardly affiliated, and we never said the name of the church or any of the like, this was not trying to like ride on the coattails of anybody in our circle. We were just wanting to, I mean, it's not really terribly different than like another social media account, just except we long formed gave our attention and our time to looking at things kind of in depth.
Yeah. So that is interesting. That's how it started. And that was kind of the pursuit you were after. And presumably still with the substance, the pursuit that you're on. But I'm curious when Vince and Trevor decided that it was time for them to step aside from the substance and pursue other things. You clearly had a desire to keep the substance going. So what is it about the substance that still like offers you something, right? Because I think if this was only draining to you and a chore, then when the two guys you were doing it with stepped aside, you would have been like, okay, I'm done. But you decided that no, this is something I want to keep doing if possible. So what does the substance offer you, Phil, that it was something that's worth carrying on?
When Trevor and I first started, before Vince was on, in our first 12 episodes, we just kind of looked at the landscape, and that was in like 2018 or so, 2018, 2019. Just looking, and there were definitely fewer podcasts, but still, even now, a lot of the popular podcasts in religion and spirituality category are either like just straight up preaching, which is good and has value, cultural analysis, kind of like punditry, which has varying degrees of value. I feel like a lot of that is pretty polarizing and almost like religious version of like political talk radio. And not that none of that is good, but we absolutely didn't want to do that. Or you have some of the folks who are just kind of Jesus jukey and maybe not making the deepest content where it's like, oh, like, what's the most popular thing and like what can we learn from Jesus from Guardians of the Galaxy? And it's like that, again, not that doesn't have value, but that's not what we were trying to do. So with the brand of the substance, it was like, how can we both offer value actively and kind of build a community, like build a place of people like well, I remember coming up with Trevor, sitting down, I think we did this over 2 different sessions, going like, okay, like what's our mission statement? We came up with the biblical, thoughtful, and human, engaging the culture without the culture war. Like,
which can I just say, engaging the culture without the culture war. I love that tagline. Like,
thanks, man.
Well done.
I remember at the end of that brainstorming session when we got to that, I was like, slam dunk. Yep, that's it.
That's good.
That is it. Because it's like, old and new books, old and new movies. We don't cover music as much as we'd like because that other stuff are just the worlds that I'm in more. I'm reading and watching a lot more than I'm listening to music. But I mean, like we've had Flame and Propaganda, Show Baraka, some of those guys on. We wanted a place to where there was not just theology proper, like systematic theology, or this week we're going to only talk about prayer, and not that we don't do those things, right? But that we have a variety of things. And we talked about this previously, that I call us a variety show in that there are different formats and we cover different types of topics. And depending on what week you listen, obviously like it was run by Trevor and I, and then Trevor and Vincent, myself, or even now with me, until I find somebody else. Like, there's going to be a similar vibe because the hosts are running it with their personalities.
Right.
But like, we want to be deeply interested and give people a wide variety of things.
I think, like you're saying, you guys have marked out a little bit of a niche in doing that and doing it well too. And I think,
thank you, man. Like God has biblical folks, like if that is kind of where we're starting from, God is the creator of all things, and in all things there is truth and beauty and value. And we didn't want to be like only theology proper, or even only cinema, or only social history. Like, all of these things have value.
Right.
And I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of great podcasts that only talk about different types of historical, like, education and what can we learn from the past for today, or only literature, or only music, or only movies. And we wanted part of it was like, I'm sometimes a very unresourceful 7, and I like a lot of different things, and I didn't want to be like, I can only talk about movies, or I can only I can only interview social activists. Like, I want to do everything.
Yeah. And I think in so many ways, podcasts become that, right? Like, they become a reflection of who you are, the host. I know with Thinking Out Loud now, with the Gospel According to podcast, that like it's a reflection of who I am. It's the things that I'm interested in. And so if as a 7 you are interested in a lot of different things, then that's what the people are going to get. But I think that's helpful to learn how to think through a variety of different issues biblically.
Yeah, because I don't want to start 10 podcasts, but if I want to talk to somebody who works in the film industry, somebody who's a city planner, somebody who's a literature professor, I want to be able to have them all on the same program and have it all feel comfortable. And the producer, I've been a longtime podcast listener. I've been listening to podcasts since probably 2007, 2008. I've been listening for a long time. Yeah, like I know I don't want to paint myself into a corner of if like I would love to spin substantive cinema off into its own thing at some point, and we could keep that going forever, but I wouldn't want to only have that. Like I said, because in God's creation, there is truth and beauty and value in all things. Like I know we have people who like, I love it when you talk to authors who I like Christian authors who I like. Some people are like, I love your substantive cinema episodes. Some people are like, I love when you answer audience questions with the topic toss-ups, which we do need to figure out how to do topic toss-ups now that I'm maybe have like guest hosts. I don't know, like different of my internet friends.
Yeah, do you do any good impressions?
My wife asked me about that, and I was like, I'm not going to be monologuing. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, if anyone wants to hear that, cool, thanks, I guess. But I don't want to do that. Part of my like thinking of like value for a show is each person brings their own value to it. There's some people who like their favorite thing is one thing. I get a kick out of somebody who's like, I just like movies, but then here's Karen Swallow Pryor, Jamar Tisby, or Sho Baraka, or Justin Gibney, and like here are other very important things too.
Right.
So you and also just practically like you can build your audience larger with different people who look forward to their most favorite thing. And when people can share all sorts of different episodes too. We just redid our top 10 list. I think we're going to be publishing that soon. There's a lot of different types of shows on that.
Yeah.
And then when you share that list, all sorts of different people can find different sorts of value in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's what you're seeking to offer. That's what it is offering to people. And I think that is needed and necessary and filling a good spot. I've noticed in kind of this general type of person, like myself and you, who have a platform and or are trying to create a platform like for ourselves to speak into Christianity and culture, but aren't we're not sold out to the conservative agenda or lack of a better word. But we're still here, there tends to be a lot of cynicism, either against the church or like politically cynical. And unfortunately, I think by necessity, like those two things definitely merge, and it can just pass off as like, here are all the things wrong. And if you all were more like me or like my guest, then this would be a better place, but you're probably too stupid or too much drinking the Kool-Aid to do it. How do you fight against that cynicism, and where are you able to find hope?
So a couple of things. One, I'll start off with the cynicism aspect of it. There are a few social media accounts and podcasts in particular that I think of that are kind of in that lane, right? Where nearly 100% of the content is, here is a bad thing that we are against and we denounce and we are mocking and ridiculing, and aren't these so-called Christians bad? And I think that perhaps the intent behind some of that is good, right? Like calling out evil and injustice and hypocrisy and wickedness, like that has value. Like shining a light on darkness has value, right? But like I said, a few in particular that I think of where the result, and I have to imagine that consciously or unconsciously, maybe part of the goal is to rile people up. And I mean, look, like we're both producers and promoters, right? Like we both are promoting our shows. We're looking for sponsors. We're looking for guests. Like, I don't think promotion is inherently bad, but it's a fact of humanity that there are like the baser things get people more riled up. And I mean, you can see that regardless of where you land, conservatively or progressively on the political, religious, whatever spectrum, like extreme rhetoric and negative examples of the other will get you listeners, get you donors, get you sponsors. Like, I mean, Tucker Carlson doesn't even have a platform, and how many followers does he still have? Like, building a platform on rage and building a platform on denouncing the other is easy. And I've jokingly, seriously said, if I had no scruples, I'd be a conservative pundit. Like, they make tens of millions of dollars just spouting off nonsense, but it's harming the country. And when done religiously, whether it's conservative or progressive, I think it harms the church and it harms the world. Yeah. And again, let me be very clear. And we've done this on the show plenty of times. Shining a light on darkness is good, but kind of merely being a shill for an agenda that otherizes your opponent is unhealthy. That's not what I want to do.
And I think we do see that in political rhetoric where, you know, it's kind of like, if you don't do what we want you to do, this is what we will become. Look at what they're doing to our country, or like, this is what they want. And so it's shining a light on darkness, but not in a way that is restorative or redemptive. It's in a way that is tribal. And even we see that in the church too.
And I mean, I'll say this, Editor Dave, I'll give you can stop me, cut me off, and I can rewind here, but like, I don't mind saying, and I like I have a lot of positive feelings towards the New Evangelicals. We had Tim Whitaker of the New Evangelicals on. But I mean, when I look at the vast majority of output from them, I haven't listened to the podcast in a little while, but when I read the Twitter threads, I watch the Instagram reels, when I have listened to the podcast actually is maybe some of the better ones because they are able to actually engage.
It's long form.
And it's harder to keep that going long form. But I mean, I look at that and I go, what if you're building a community around stoking resentment? Like, I think there is great, like, survivor communities and in trauma and healing. Like, I think there's great value in lament. And this is where I was talking about earlier. One of our guests recently, we talked at quite a bit of length about the value of lament and sorrow. You look at Old Testament poetry, there is a lot of lament and crying out to God and bemoaning injustice to God, asking God for help, and even like asking that God brings the people perpetuating evil to justice. That is good. That is right. But just merely socially using our platforms to create resentment, I don't know how valuable that is. Like, I want to be much more known for what I affirm and what I am for than what I denounce and what I reject. And I love Tim. I hope that the New Evangelicals, like, this isn't exactly shots at them, but when I see I just go like, that's not what I think. And I don't even know, I think it may have even gotten away from him because I know his story. He told that on the show, like, creating a community where people can kind of do the deconstruction work in a safe space, I think is of immense value.
Watching the New Evangelicals and then Honest Youth Pastor. I don't know if you followed that account, but
I've seen it. I don't really follow it.
I know you're
in the youth world.
Yeah. They kind of are like, they're almost like the polar opposite of each other. They're doing the same thing, but from like opposite directions. And it's just, I've had interactions with both of them personally, and like, both of them, I think, are great guys that are like really cordial and nice to talk to and like happy to have like open discussion and dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. Absolutely.
And I don't know how much that comes across in their social media because of kind of the lanes that they've chosen to take. It is easy to get sucked into that, especially when you're talking about short form media like Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Whereas in podcasting, it's easier to flesh out a conversation and to have
and to add nuance. And that's why I get that some people like the 30-minute shows. I like having an hour, sometimes a little bit more. We do try to keep it 60 to 70 minutes. Like, it is nice to be able to not overstay your welcome, but just like give people enough time to really think about a topic and not just like, blah, here's a thing. Yeah.
And I think it's about storytelling. You know, a conversation isn't necessarily a traditional story, like, you know, beginning, middle, end, but you are telling a story through the medium of podcasting. And
absolutely.
I think that's what is missing from so much of the cynical conversation, and even the like one-sided fear mongering that happens, is you're not telling beautiful stories. You're getting people's fears and emotions riled up. And that has short-term results that might, if it's to be cynical for a moment, short-term results that might, you know, stuff your pockets or get you listeners or followers or whatever. But fear is not a great long-term motivator.
Well, because then if that has to be your platform going forward, that will do damage. And if that's the thing that you have trained yourself, this is the thing that gets me the result I want. If that's material, financial, influence, whatever, that has to keep like the thing that gets you in is the thing that keeps you going. Yeah. And if you try to use that to get you going, then yeah, that's hard.
I think it was actually the OG deconstructor, Rob Bell, who I remember him talking about how Christians need to tell better stories and that Christians should be the best storytellers. And that really, when you look at even just in, you know, post Jesus, you look at the early church in Acts and the apostles, the story that they're telling, there is a story of sin and you killed Jesus, but there's also like story of new life and new life in Christ. And they're painting this beautiful picture, even in the way that they're living within community, not fear mongering of, you know, do you want to burn forever?
Well, because fear mongering either way, and this is something we talk about a lot, like theology of place and community and the fellowship of the saints, like that's in the religious, like fellowship of the saints inside the church, but outside the church in the world, community and in living and thriving in the place you're in. When you are fear mongering, stoking hate, stoking fear, stoking the distrust or the like repulsion of your neighbor, you can't thrive in relationship with the people around you. You can only be with the people who agree with you, and that narrows and narrows and narrows. And we see like Christians and quote unquote conservative people eating their own and all sorts of wild stories that are coming out now. It's like, you're not conservative enough. It's just like the whole DEI thing. They're boycotting Chick-fil-A because they have diversity. And it's like, so do the gun companies you love. So does the White House when Republicans are presidents. So that like, what do you like? You hate diversity so much that like we're going to stop eating chicken, which whatever about that anyway. Yeah, it's so silly.
Yeah, and even like that whole thing has been kind of crazy. You're talking about Chick-fil-A hiring the DEI, which was not a new position. It was just a new person in an old position that existed, but whatever.
And like every established company has that.
Yes.
Are you going to whatever. It's
so around the same time was when a pride flag was on the set of The Chosen, one of like the cameramen or whatever. And like the Daily Wire, very like right wing.
Oh, that was very weird. Right? That was very weird.
So they run this story about why The Chosen has gone woke or whatever. And then the owner or like CEO of Daily Wire like tweets out the story and is like, this is a disgusting story. I'm sorry we ran it, which is also a weird thing because like, can't you just pull the story? Like you run the site. But then his followers kind of have a backlash on him.
Yep.
And it was
a wild volley back and forth. It wasn't surprising that the Daily Wire is like, pride flag found on The Chosen. We got to stop watching this Jesus show, everybody. But it was surprising to see the CEO guy go, no, like, they're a company they don't have to employ Christians to make this.
Right.
A person had a flag. Like, it's not that big of a deal, guys. And then you see, but he has built his platform on rage stoking and othering, and then he made himself the target of his own people that he created. It's just like, what an interesting thing.
Yeah. But he called it, I think he called it like, this is like a purity death spiral or something.
Yeah.
And that is so much of what I think we're seeing, where now I think both on the left and the right, like there's just this strive for purity that you end up eating your own. Like even it, like Tesla, I'm old enough to remember when Tesla was like the pride of the left wing because they were going with electric cars and saving the environment. And now Elon Musk has talked enough that it's like, can't get a Tesla. Like now that's a right wing thing. So it's just so crazy how because we're
it's
not
untenable.
It's untenable. Whereas if we're telling beautiful stories about this is what the world could be, right? Instead of stoking fears, if we stoke people's imagination of what could the world be, I think that is sustainable. It doesn't have as quick results as, the fear mongering, but I think it has long lasting results.
Well, and I know that some people kind of very ironically mock it when people bring up this point, but look at the life and ministry of Jesus. What did he do? And who did he rebuke? You look at him, yes, calling people to repentance, but the near entirety of Jesus's rebukes were leveled at the hypocrites in the religious establishment. And you just go like, have we thought deeply about this? Yeah. People who consider themselves Bible people, like, I don't like to throw around, you're being a Pharisee or whatever, but it's just like, look at the Gospels. Where do you find yourself?
Yeah.
And not that it's like, I know that I'm not always in the right. It's just like, let's be doing this on purpose. And that's, as long as we have a platform of this with the substance, that's a big part of the goal, to encourage conversations, to encourage people to consider Jesus through various compelling stories.
Yeah. And I think that intellectual and theological humility is so important. And yeah, I mean, it is a Jesus juke, I guess, but like it is also very clear in the example of Jesus' life. I think what has struck me recently is like looking at the Gospels and the life of Jesus through our current like political lens. I feel like to our eyes, the biggest problem in Jesus's day should have been Rome. Right? Like they were under Roman oppression. And so if you could just undo Rome, then things would be better. Give us our freedom. And yet Jesus went to Rome not at all. And any of his interactions with Romans were like healing them or their children or their servants. And so that just, I don't know, it's very challenging and interesting how like localized Jesus's mission was. In America, I don't know that our mission feels global, but it definitely feels national, that like we have to get the right people into national office so that the right things can happen and Christians can be free or whatever. But I don't know that that's the way that Jesus would have approached that. Jesus' mission.
It's absolutely not the way. And actually, I just saw a thread today from Alex Harris. I reached out to him to see if he would come on in the wake of the Duggar documentary. He had a really interesting thread about like various concerted efforts 2 generations ago to get, or several generations ago, and then it kind of relaunched a couple generations ago to get Christians, like hyper conservative Christians, in seats of power. And now we're kind of seeing some of the fallout from that. And it's not great. It's not people coming, funnily enough, it's not people recognizing the lordship of Jesus and like being grateful for the gospel. It's religious fascism. And like, that's what there was back then too. And nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. So back to storytelling and storytelling more broadly. Clearly, that's a big part of the substance. We've already discussed how the substance is in some ways a reflection of who you are. So your like love for storytelling, compelling storytelling, is that something that developed later in life as you matured? Do you think like stories were always, I mean, as kids, right? We all love bedtime stories, but how do you see this love of storytelling cultivated in your life?
No, that was super, super young. I was a big movie, television, library kid. Like my grandma taught me to read when I was 3. I mean, I had both my parents growing up, but I spent a lot of time with my grandmother before I went into school. She taught me how to read before school. I was always watching movies or going to the library, checking out books. Like I've always been a story guy. Like, because I mean, I like reading nonfiction. I read professional development nonfiction, like when I'm working on stuff professionally. I read plenty of the Christian thinking and historical nonfiction for the podcast and just for my own edification. But I mean, there is something, for lack of a better word, not to sound too juvenile, but there is something magical about narrative that can get things across in a way that other stuff can't. Like there are plenty of one. So shameless plug for our upcoming substantive cinema episode. Our previous one was great. I love Raging Bull, but there's a lot of negative lessons to be learned in that. Our next substantive cinema is going to be on the 2011 Liam Neeson action thriller, The Grey, where he ostensibly just fights wolves in Alaska, but it's also a very beautiful meditation on mortality and the meaning and the value of human life. And when I was watching that movie for the podcast, just like the things that a well-told story will cause you to consider personally, and the way in which that it does that, strict prose can't do. Like it's a different part of your brain or your psyche or whatever. And all of that is valuable. That's why we do, like, that's why we have the Jamar Tisbys on to talk about history. And that's why we have the activists or Felicia Wusong to talk about like the neuroscience of how our devices are affecting us. That is all extremely important. But yeah, no, I'm a big story guy. Yeah. Movies. I will, like, my perfect life is to make enough money, take care of my family well, and then be able to read and watch as much as I can in a responsible way.
Yeah. And maybe because we just did the Jesus Juke a few moments ago, I'm on the Jesus Juke train right now. And like Jesus told stories. Jesus, like of all the people who could
parables
have come down,
were like he knew the law. He would take people through the law, but when he was instructing people in real time, the way he conveyed the law to people as the God the Son in human form was through story.
Well, and just like the prodigal son, right? Like the story that God loves you, and even if you run away from him, will accept you back. Jesus could have just come and been like, said that.
Yeah.
But instead, he told the story of the prodigal son. And we're still talking about that story because there is something, I think, disarming about stories that kind of leaves us vulnerable. There's something, you said magical. There's something
because they're not principial, right? Like you can't argue with the story. Like we did an episode, I don't know if you listened to it. It's a much older, an earlier episode on the Good Samaritan. Like when that story is told and you are engaging with it, like Jesus paints that story. Like the story is the baseline, not a set of propositions about social status and the respectability of various people groups or whatever. But he's like, here's a story. So that's the baseline. Like who did write in this story? And you can't say the religious leaders who didn't want to be unclean. You can't say that. You can feel like I have a reason to ignore my neighbor in need because of X, Y, Z, and I'm going to argue those merits. But then when Jesus starts with the story of a man was taken. A man was attacked by robbers, and these people saw it and didn't help, and this person did. Like that's inarguable. You can't argue with that.
People break our stereotypes all of the time. That we have to be faced with that. And a good story like the Good Samaritan does that to you. It's not being shouted down on a street corner or shouted down in a Twitter thread. It's a story that transports you somewhere else. And it is, like you just said, it's inescapable. You can't escape. Yes, in this story that happened. And it stirs up. That was not my expectation. And how come? And now I have to look inward and do that work of like, why is my brain conditioned to think the Samaritan is always the bad guy and can only be the bad guy? So yeah, stories are powerful. I know you like all sorts of storytelling, but movies, the substantive cinema, seems to be more your lane.
Oh yeah, I love them.
Yeah.
That's probably my primary. Like, I probably saw my first movie at like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old, and I'm a big movie guy.
Yeah. So give me some of like the formative movies of Philip Marinello's life. What ones like stand out as this, either for love of movie, love of cinema, or even just like formative to who you are?
Well, that I could probably do several podcasts on that. But I mean, yeah, the first movie I remember seeing and loving and kind of being shaped by was the old 1938 The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, the old live action movie. It was just so exciting and thrilling, and there was action and adventure and romance and stakes, and he is the guy living on the outside with the outcasts, trying to help them get a fair shake when and I couldn't have articulated all of that, but I mean, I think that is an incredible story. And I was like, oh, well, he's an outlaw, he stole a little bit, but like what he really did was try to stop the powers that be who were exploiting the people from doing so. And I mean, I haven't thought about that in a while, but I'm sure that was formative in a lot of different ways for me. But yeah, like I tell people, like when they're like, oh, what's your favorite movie? Like, that's impossible. But the three I usually rattle off to kind of give a spread is Hot Fuzz, The Tree of Life, and Blade Runner. Just very different movies that. Yeah. And if I throw in an animated one, I usually will go Ratatouille. I love all sorts of stories. And I had a blast introducing Trevor to Terrence Malick, because those movies, did you watch along with any of our Terrence Malick movies?
I actually haven't, and like both of them I very much want to. By
We've
both
done like
of them,
4 or 5, I think.
Yeah, by both of them I mean Tree of Life and A Hidden Life. Those two specifically, they've been at like the top of my to watch list for a long time, and I have no good reason to say why.
A Tree of Life is much more challenging because it breaks cinematic norms a lot more than A Hidden Life is probably his most straightforward movie, I'd say. It's straightforward because it's a narrative.
Right.
But it's also 3 hours, but very, very worth it. Highly recommended. But yeah, no, I love everything, man. Like old stuff, new stuff. I'm a big proponent of non-English movies and subtitles and all that. I don't think we've done have we done any foreign films? I don't think we've done any substantive cinema. We might stretch it. We did a lot of Criterion movies in a row, so I was excited that our next one's going to be The Grey, ostensibly a Liam Neeson mindless action movie, but it's got a lot more substance than one would think. So I'm excited to kind of break it up there. Maybe I feel like we haven't done an animated one in a while. Maybe we'll do another one of those.
Did you guys do Arrival?
No, not yet. Right. I like genre a lot.
That's my pitch for Arrival's one of my favorite movies. It's up there.
Yeah, we've got a lot of suggestions for both Arrival and Annihilation, and I think those would both make great shows.
Yeah. All right. So when it comes to the substance, people can expect a lot of the same. The engaging culture without the culture war, focusing on good, meaningful.
We got to make that a shirt. That should be one of our first batch of shirts. Engaging the culture without the culture war.
You're right. That should be on a t-shirt somewhere. More focusing on storytelling that is beautiful, pointing to something meaningful. But are there wide open future for you here with the substance? Are there things that you have in mind or are hoping for with the future of the substance? What can people be looking forward to?
I mean, yeah, definitely more of like just to continue to mine the depths. Like we've not done me think about this here. I don't think we've done a fiction book yet. Like I would love to do, that just takes a little bit more work. And it is nice that we are bi-weekly. I would love to cover maybe some novels, old and new. Like, and that's kind of an interesting thing. You're like, well, we don't want to only think of, oh, what do people want? But we also go, we don't want to make it as hard for people to engage as possible. So we probably won't be starting with like Dostoevsky or anything, but I would love to do that one of these days. But yeah, maybe a popular novel that is of substance that many people would at least know the name and get to engage with. And we've talked about, you and I, maybe book clubs or movie clubs. Like I would love to, as the audience grows and maybe as audience support and sponsorships grow, to have a little bit more breathing room. If we have a little bit of cash and time, I would love to put together more like audience engagement with the audience, like have little book clubs, have little film clubs to where, in addition to like listening to the show every other week when it comes out, folks can be engaging and sharpening one another and building relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. So, and if that's something that you're interested in, listener, book club, you'd be down for that, or film club or something, let us know.
I was excited that was one of the top answers when I threw it out to the audience. Like, if we were to roll out one, because I got a lot going on, you've got a lot going on, we're not making it up unless we got like a mega sponsor. If somebody wanted to be like $100,000 a year substance sponsor, you and I could split that. That'd be great. Then maybe we could put a little bit more into it. But if probably one at a time benefits for listener supporters, I was like, I love that they said that one, because it's like, I think that would be really enriching for everybody.
Should we do a substance shout out? I've never done a substance shout out before, but somewhere in there, I was like, see, it was always Trevor who was surprised by him, but Trevor, I got him back for you. I surprised Phil.
So I will say, this is a podcast that I was aware of before. It's got 3 guys who I like, 2 guys who I really like. And it's just, I've got so many podcasts. Whenever I hear about celebrities starting a new podcast, I don't usually rush to check it out, right? Because it's like, I already listen to so many. These people are already going to be immediately successful. And not that I begrudge them any of their success. It's just like, I'm not somebody looking for a podcast to listen to. I have loads. But are you familiar with the Smartless podcast?
No.
So that's Will Arnett and Jason Bateman from Arrested Development. And then... Yes. Forgive me, I forget his name, from Will and Grace. So they have a podcast. They're good friends. They have insane celebrities on. They have like the biggest people in show business on. Like they had President Biden on one time. They had Jerry Seinfeld on. Like hardly anybody gets Seinfeld on. Like they get the biggest people on. They had AOC on recently. Like they have wild guests. And I knew that they were good. And I was like, I'm sure I'd probably like it. But they recently, a year or two ago, they took the podcast on tour, which no way that we could go on a substance tour. But here in Kansas City, I would maybe love to, because this is a sidebar on my shout out. Sorry, Dave. I would love to just have like community impact. So I've talked with a few people here in Kansas City I have talked about substantive cinema with my local theater, about doing more of that. But even like the AND campaign chapter here, or some other local organizations here, just trying to use the platform of the substance for communal good here in Kansas City and wherever listeners are. Maybe they can kind of get involved in some people. I'd love to see that too. But all that to say, the Smartless guys went on tour and they had like a documentary crew filming it. And now it's a mini series. So I've been really enjoying watching the documentary, and now I'm listening to the show too. So Smartless, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, you love it. And I'm like, nah, I'm sure I would, but I don't need another one. Now I'm a Smartless listener. I really love getting to watch the behind the scenes of like 3 very successful, good friends on tour together, middle-aged guys who are all very funny, very talented, and kind of seeing how the production of their show behind the scenes goes. Just them being funny amongst themselves. That was, and honestly, some of it is pretty darn substantive too. So the HBO Max, now Max, Smartless on the Road series and the Smartless podcast are what I've been enjoying quite a bit lately.
I'll probably have to add those to my list. I think probably because of the documentary, I've seen some clips have found their way into my TikTok algorithm.
Sure. I have an account. I was on it right when it started, but deleted it immediately. I'm like, I don't need another thing.
I know. And I fought so long to not be on TikTok. But
you got a podcast to promote.
I got a podcast to promote. So that's why I'm on there. Anyway, my substance shout outs are, I got two actually. So I've been reading the Wing Feather Saga.
I saw your little podcast mic stand there.
Yeah, by Andrew Peterson.
Andrew Peterson, come on the substance.
Yeah, do it. I'm on book 2, and they're just so good.
You're reading them to your kids?
Not yet.
Okay.
My oldest is 10, and she will love it. She's very like studious and concerned about her time and things. So I'm like, she has to like read stuff for school, and she's like doesn't want to read this and that at the same. She's like,
cheapers.
So I'm like, all right, when school's done, which we're almost done, we're like a week.
Yeah, that's now.
Out. Yeah. I'm like, we are reading these together. So I'm trying to finish the second one, and then I'll go back to the first one with her. But
I can't wait to read those with my kids.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
I think they skew these books, the Wing Feather Saga, skew a little younger than like Chronicles of Narnia. So,
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're going to probably start Narnia.
Okay. At least the first one does.
Well, that's the thing. When they get into like the intrigue and the danger.
It's the same with like Harry Potter.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
We read Harry Potter with my oldest, and like it starts when he's
wait to read Harry Potter.
It's when he's 11, but then, whatever, he's like a senior by the end. And if I read one a year, then Riley would grow with Harry, but we just read them all in a summer.
It's so hard to read. Yeah. One in a year. And then you get into some pretty dark death and destruction and trauma and relationships. Like that can be hard for little ones.
Wing Feather Saga is number 1. Number 2, I am going to go music here. Half Alive. Are you familiar with this band? They're so good. Their first album, I think they're not a Christian band, but I think they are Christians. And on their first album,
all lowercase with a dot in the middle.
That's them. They have a song called Creature on their first album, I think.
Would that be Now Not Yet?
Now Not Yet, yes.
Okay.
You already hear the Christian vibes in that. They have a album that came out, I think, the end of last year, 2022, or the beginning of this year. But it's like
2022, Conditions of a Punk?
Yes. Conditions of a
December
Punk.
of 22.
And it's like a 17-track album, and every one of them is so good. So shout out to Half Alive. So the Wing Feather Saga and Half Alive. Those are my shout outs. Well, Phil, thank you for letting me hop on the substance.
Yeah, man. Thanks. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed I hope you enjoyed Editor Dave. I'm sure at various guests here in the future, you'll be jumping on as co-host. I am not actively looking for a co-host. I would love for some divine providence of like a perfect guy, or gal potentially, but a perfect person who like jives really well, compliments really well, and that I could do this for a long term with. It was just that Trevor, I've literally known him for like 32 years.
Yeah.
And that's impossible to replicate. And the only other lifelong friend, or that the only other friend I have that I've known that long, I probably haven't talked to in like 5 years. So it's going to be hard for me to find somebody. I would love to find somebody at some point. And I just actually had a listener text me today. Like, hey, this is random, and sorry if you don't feel free to say no, but I got somebody who I think could be an interesting co-host. And I was like, okay, I'll talk to them when I have time.
Explore that. Yeah, I get that. If you'll allow me one more shout out, I am currently co-hosting the Gospel According to podcast.
Oh, please. Yes. Yeah. Usually we say, hey, what do you got in the show notes? Dave, talk about your shows.
Yeah, so the Gospel According to podcast, I co-host with a longtime friend of mine, probably 25 years we've known each other, went to youth group together, and we were both youth pastors, and so like our churches would do a lot of stuff together. But the Gospel According to, you may have seen us because we've interacted with you, Phil, the Substance, over
our Super Bowl bet. That was great.
Yeah, with our
Thanks
Super
for the
Bowl
shirt.
bet. And we very tongue-in-cheek call ourselves the first and only podcast looking at pop culture and Christian culture. Not too dissimilar to the Substance. We do take ourselves. We try to bring the youth group vibe to. We're like the youth group version of the Substance, maybe.
Yeah.
we don't take ourselves too seriously. We like to play games with our guest and.
On my episode, I think I shouted that out here on the show. We did a Batman.
Yeah, you were
trivia,
on for Batman. Yeah, I think that's like we instead of seasons we do volumes. So if I remember correctly, that was like volume 1, episode 12 or whatever. Maybe I'll throw that one in the show notes, or you can throw that one in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah, I know it was an early one.
It was an early one. I think our show has gotten better, both production and
I feel you on that one.
We're smoother.
That's good.
Than we were.
It's growth.
Yeah, so check it out. We did our Ted Lasso episode. I think that was one of the better ones that we've done kind of ever, but especially recently. And then we do like pop culture stuff like that, but then we just do things that are seasonal. Like we did a beach episode, the Gospel According to the Beach, and had some fun with that. So if that's your thing, we try to keep it a little bit shorter to like 30, 45 minutes. So check that out. And even follow us on Instagram. We're kind of on all the social medias at TGAT Podcast. We have some fun. We put the fun clips up there too. So yeah, that's what I got to shout out.
Nice, man. Well, hey, thank you for this. Very much appreciate having a full-time editor that is not only just competent, but like understands what we're trying to do, and is even looking to be a long-term partner. So excited for the future of the Substance with you, man. All right. See you next time, everybody.
Be sure to follow us at The Substance Pod on all social media. Intro music supplied by Trevor Aiken and Vincent Edwards. All show art is from Anna Marinello and Vincent Edwards. The Substance Pod is hosted by Philip Marinello and edited by me, Dave Hallahan. Feedback, guest, or topic suggestions can be sent to thesubstancepod@gmail.com. You can also send voice messages over there or by calling 913-703-3883. If this show is something that has had a positive impact on you and it's something you want to show your love and support for, there are a few ways to do that. Word of mouth recommendations always go a really long way, as does any financial support. You can hit up the link in the show notes and become a monthly supporter at $5 or $10 a month. Phil and I have had some preliminary conversations about some perks, but as of right now, it's just a good faith monthly donation. If you want to give financially but monthly support isn't your thing, then you can hit us up on Cash App at $TheSubstancePod. Join us again in 2 weeks for the next episode of The Substance. Speaking of music, just because of the way like Twitter works or whatever, I've interacted with tweets that are like talking about the bands Brand New and Taking Back Sunday. Were they a part of your?
I've got Dejan Tendu on vinyl at home.
Did you have to like track that down?
No, I got it right when it re-released, and it was like only like $30 or like I got it right out of repressing.
Okay,
so I didn't have to spend a crazy amount for it.
I'm like 2 years into like my vinyl obsession. So I missed like, now I have to like track if I want it, I have to spend a ton of money on it. But yeah, Brand New is they certainly were my favorite band for a while.
Agreed.
But all of their albums speak to different versions of me. But yeah, love Brand New.
Well, if we're just chit-chatting here, I'll also say that I've been listening. This is not necessarily a Substance shout out, but this speaks to me. Were you ever a Day to Remember guy?
Yeah.
They're a Florida band. I've got a trip coming up here in a couple weeks back to Florida. And I feel like every time I go back to Florida, I go through a couple weeks of just cranking A Day to Remember and just kind of brings back the nostalgic vibes.
Yeah. As we head into summer, Taking Back Sunday, Tell All Your Friends. For
Yep.
some reason, that is just the summer album for me. Like, I don't know if there's memories that I have associated with it that I'm not able to like pinpoint or what, but it's just a summer album for me. Much like Deja Entendu for me is a fall album. Maybe just the color scheme of the album being like those orange and yellow tones. I'm not sure, but
It's interesting. I guess Editor Dave, cut that out. Let me start over.
let me pause for a second as my daughter comes in. What's up?
I had to keep my arm down for white happy day for my bubble dot hot.
Trevor, I got him back for you.